the 7 essential tools for biblical interpretation. The 7 most common tools for Bible study are 1. A Bible in our own language, 2. A Bible concordance or index, 3. Bible dictionaries or encyclopedias, 4. Bible commentaries, 5. Bible handbooks, 6. Bible atlases, and 7. Books on biblical customs and manners. Among these tools, the only truly indispensable tool is a good translation of the Bible in our own language, which for most of us, of course, is English. Next slide. The most important tool for the interpretation of God's Word is a good translation or translations of the Bible. The reason for this is simple. Few people today can read the original languages in which the Bible was written. We must be careful in choosing the translation we use for serious Bible study, since there are hundreds of English translations of the Bible to choose from, and all translations are not equally well done. There are 3 main barriers a translator must get over in translating the Bible. First, there is the nature of language itself. Language is, by its very nature, often ambiguous. That is, words can have a variety of meanings. The word cool can be a matter of temperature, a matter of attitudes, many other things. Also, words change their meaning over time. The way the word gay was used in the early 19th century and the 20th century, the latter 20th century, is very different. Different authors also use words differently. A good example of that is Paul and James in their use of the words work and faith. Although they use the same words, they do not mean the same thing by what they say. Add to that the problem of idiomatic expressions and play on words, which are often not understood by people of a second culture. Secondly, the translators are human, and therefore they are subject to error. They have their own set of biases, and they are limited in their knowledge of the original languages and of biblical times, and they are often forced to make choices between various legitimate options for translation. For example, in Genesis 6:2, who are the sons of God? The NIV, the King James, and the New American Standard translates it sons of God. The Living Bible translates it angels, and the Good News, heavenly beings. The New American Bible, sons of heaven. Or are they the godly line of Seth, or some other group? Thirdly, the sources are not perfect. The earliest books of the Bible were written over 3,500 years ago, and the most recent are over 2,000 years old. Obviously, none of the original copies made by the original authors, which we call the autographs, are still in existence. They have been repeatedly copied for thousands of years, and the copies we have are all not identical. There are over 5,000 Greek manuscripts of part or all of the New Testament alone, and no 2 of these are exactly alike. In addition to this, the vast majority of both the Greek manuscripts of the New Testament and the Hebrew text of the Old Testament are from the Middle Ages. Next page. With so many translations to choose from, how do we select the best translation? There are 2 main considerations in evaluating a translation. First is the question of sources used. That is, the quality of the manuscripts used in translation determines the potential quality of the translation. How do you determine that? Well, one way is age. The age of the manuscripts, that is, older is better. The King James, for example, used the Textus Receptus, a text based on very few manuscripts, and all of these were from the late Middle Ages period. On the other hand, the newer translations, like the NIV and the New American Standard and the English Standard Version and so forth, use many older manuscripts, including some dating from as early as the 3rd or 4th century, and nearly 1,000 years older than those used by the King James. Also, quality of the manuscripts, that is, how careful were they in copying the text. There are 2 main families of Greek texts, called the Alexandrian text, which is the older texts, and the Byzantine texts, which are the majority of texts. Most scholars consider the older or earlier Alexandrian manuscripts as better than than the later Byzantine manuscripts, while others think the majority of text represents the better manuscripts. Thirdly, comparison of manuscripts. Does the translation compare various translations or various texts? The King James used very few manuscripts, and none of them early. The New King James uses a number of manuscripts, but gives preference to the majority text, whereas the New American Standard, the NIV, use many manuscripts, but gives preference to what they consider the older manuscripts, the Alexandrian texts. The second question is the question of the theory of translation. This has to do with the degree of freedom a translator feels he can have in translating the Bible in order to bridge the historical distance which separates the modern world from the world of the author. Historical distance is defined as the degree of difference that exists between the original language of the Bible text and the language of the translation in matters of words, grammar, idioms, culture, and history. Next slide. There are three principal theories of translation that govern how this historical distance is bridged. The literal translation tries to stay as close as possible to the words and phrasings of the original language. This approach strives to eliminate as much as possible the translator's bias, but in so doing, it maintains the historical distance intact, leaving some passages ambiguous. On the other extreme is the free translation or paraphrase. This approach tries to translate the ideas rather than the words or phrases. It tries to eliminate as much as possible the ambiguousness of the historical distance, but in so doing, it often reflects the translator's biases. The third theory is the dynamic equivalency. Dynamic equivalency translations attempt to do something in between. This approach tries to minimize both the bias of the translator and the ambiguousness of the historical distance by translating words, idioms, and grammatical constructions of the original language into precise equivalents in the receptor language. This style, therefore, maintains historical distance of historical facts, but updates language, grammar, and style. In practice, every translation includes some of all three approaches, but in general, any given translation will fall somewhere between the totally literal and the totally free translation. You notice the chart above. The chart shown on this slide compares some of the most popular translations, the literal being way to the left and the free way to the right, the dynamic equivalency in the middle. Notice the New American Standard and the King James are considered literal translation overall, whereas the Message and the Living Bible are free. The NIV and the New English Bible are dynamic equivalents, whereas the New American Bible, the NAB, and the RSV are somewhere between the literal and the dynamic equivalent, and the New Living Translation is between the dynamic equivalent and the free translation. In actual translation, any specific translation may be at one time more literal in one passage and more free in another. Next slide. For Bible study, I recommend that you compare several translations. Include at least one literal translation and one dynamic equivalent translation. Free translations are always paraphrases, usually written by one man, while literal and dynamic equivalent translations are usually the work of a team of men. Therefore, avoid free translations for serious interpretation. My first choice is the New American Standard, since it is, in my opinion, the best modern translation. The NIV, the New Revised Standard Version, the English Standard Version are also good translations. The New King James Version and the New Living Translation are also good for comparison purposes. Next slide. Next to a good translation, the most important tool for Bible study is a good concordance. A concordance is nothing more than an alphabetical list of the words in the Bible. A concordance has two main purposes. First, to find a specific verse, which you can't find, by searching for a word in that verse. For example, if you want to find the verse, "All we like sheep are gone astray," you would pick the least common word in that, such as sheep or astray, and do a search for it. The second use is to do a word study on how a specific word is used in the Bible, in a book of the Bible, or by a specific author. For example, how does John use the phrase "born again" in chapter 3 of his Gospel? Since a concordance is an index of all the words used in a translation, each translation has its own unique concordance. Thus, you must use a concordance made for the translation you're using. Next slide. Which concordance should I use? We must choose a concordance that matches the Bible we are using. If you look at the chart above, you'll see that each of these translations translates the phrase, all we like sheep have gone astray, differently. If we are trying to find the passage that says we are like sheep who have gone astray, which is from Isaiah 53:6, and we're doing a search for the word astray, notice that we'll only find that example in 4 of the 8, where the others translate astray differently. Next slide. The most important English concordance is the Strong's Exhaustive Concordance. The Strong's Exhaustive Concordance is a concordance to the King James Version of the Bible, which is the most widely read version of the English Bible. It is exhaustive. That is, it includes every occasion of every word found in the entire King James Bible. Although 47 of the most common words are placed in an appendix at the end of the book, since they're too common to be of any use for doing searches. Thirdly, it is organized alphabetically by English words, therefore it's easy to use, and under each word it is organized in order of the way the word appears in the Bible. In other words, those in Genesis, then those in Exodus, and so forth. Fourth, it has a unique numbering system, and that's what makes it so important. It has a unique numbering system which identifies the Greek or Hebrew word which lies behind the English word. These numbers are indexed to Hebrew and Greek dictionaries at the back of the concordance. This numbering system has been adopted by many other concordances and other Bible tools. There are 2 main disadvantages to a printed concordance. First, it only works in one version. For example, the Strong's only works with King James. Secondly, you must search for exact form of a word to find a verse. In other words, if you look for love, you will not find loved or loves or loving. Each of these have their own separate entry, and that can make it very difficult. Next slide. There's nowhere that Bible software programs excel more than the area of doing Bible searches. You all have the eSword program, and you may have other Bible software as well. Notice these advantages of eSword or other Bible software. First, they work with all translations. Secondly, they can do English word searches. Thirdly, they can actually do Greek and Hebrew word searches without knowing the language by simply using Strong's number in the searches, which we'll show you later on. They can do advanced searches. That is, you can use wildcards. That is the asterisk. You can write LOV asterisk, and it will find love, loved, loves, loving, anything that begins with LOV. The use of phrases are also possible. You can search for the phrase, born again. And fifth, it gives definitions of words without having to look elsewhere. It becomes very helpful. Next slide. Other tools that are also important, which we will not talk about here, but are important tools, are numerous. First of all, there are Bible handbooks that give general background information on the Bible, Bible atlases that give geographical background, Bible commentaries that give in-depth verse-by-verse analysis of Bible passages, Bible dictionaries and Bible encyclopedias, which give information on Bible words and topics, and Bible lexicons or dictionaries, giving meaning and usage of the original word used in a passage. There are hundreds of these tools in the library, and many can be found on the internet or in Bible software programs.